Hey guys, Gold here. So, this is going to be a little bit of an unscripted video. Um, I don't know exactly if this is going to be like a regular thing that I do. It's probably not going to be like super frequent. This is just me sort of experimenting with a new thing on the channel and seeing how it goes. So, if you guys like this sort of content, I guess let me know. Maybe I can do more of it in the future, but we'll see. Anyways, so the topic that I kind of wanted to ramble a bit about tonight is something that's been on my mind since the recent Nyla announcement in Legends of Runeterra, because that got me, thinking about Nyla, and Nyla is actually a character that I really like. I really like the concept behind her. I like her backstory. I like her lore. I really don't actually have anything against Nyla as a character, aside from the fact that, she has like tangible relations to the Sentinels event, which was a complete mess. But, beyond that, I really like Nyla as a character. But as I was thinking about her recently, I sort of noticed I'm not necessarily sure if I would call it a trend exactly, but well, let's break Nyla's character down. Okay, so Nyla's whole thing is that she has an Ur-demon trapped in the jar on her hip, right? For those who are unaware, Ur-demons are supposed to be like the oldest and most powerful demons in the world of Runeterra. They are a step above demons like Evelynn or Nocturne or Tahm Kench. We frankly don't even really have like a clear idea of how powerful Ur-demons are, because the only two that we've seen so far, those being Ashlesh, the one that Nyla has, and Fiddlesticks, they appear to be weakened to some capacity, right? Again, Ashlesh is stuck in Nyla's jar, or allegedly stuck. The story is Her story makes it kind of vague as to exactly how much power Nyla actually has over Ashlesh or vice versa, but we'll get back to that in a second. Um, but of course, the other one we know about is Fiddlesticks, who's running around Demacia in the body of like this makeshift scarecrow that it created. Um, and the thing about Fiddlesticks is, so Fiddlesticks, which again is really just kind of like the folktale name of the creature that like Demacia have created like a sort of boogeyman around this thing, but Fiddlesticks is this primal demon of fear, right? The Ur-demon of fear, because each Ur-demon supposedly relates to like a primary emotion, and there's a whole theory to discuss there, but Fiddlesticks is the primal demon of fear. And there's some unexplained gimmick or mechanic regarding these keys that it wears around its neck, because Zoe, the aspect of Twilight, stole one of these keys. So we don't know what these keys are. We don't know what they're for, what they represent. We don't know their significance, but presumably, if a celestial god went out of its way to steal a key from this primal demon, presumably it was to weaken or inhibit the demon in some way, right? I mean, Ashlesh, the demon of joy, is stated to have been sealed underground by the gods, in air quotes, which, in the world of Runeterra, where we have, demigods, spirit gods, cosmic gods, all kinds of different gods, that really doesn't tell us a whole lot. But um, presumably these gods came from the heavens, so most likely this means that it was sealed away by the aspects, right? The celestial gods. But then, so the story goes that Nyla, who actually wasn't originally named Nyla, she went by another name, and so she was a young reclusive girl who was fascinated with stories and legends, and so eventually she hears this legend about this ancient, powerful being trapped underground. So she seeks this being out, which, is probably not a great idea, but she seeks this being out, and then we don't exactly know what happens. That whole encounter is kind of left as like one big question mark. But something happens between this girl and Oshlesh, the Demon of Joy. And so she comes back out underground. And the first thing is that her entire life has been erased from history, right? Somehow, for some reason, no one knows or remembers who she is. Her friends, her family, everyone has completely forgotten that she existed. Her name has been completely stricken from memory. Any written instance of her name is erased. So, like, the girl that she used to be no longer exists. Instead, she just starts calling herself Nyla, and she's got this demon stuck in a jar on her hip. So, yeah. But beyond even that, as if, literally having your identity erased from the world isn't enough of a price, the other cost to this is that Ashlesh forces Nyla into this constant state of joy, right? Like, she literally cannot feel any emotion other than happiness, which does sound like a good deal at first, but then you realize, like, how, you know, messed up and detrimental it can be to literally force to be happy all the time, right? I mean, again, it's like even in her short story, I think it's kind of summed up best where it's like Graves insults her, and we get a sort of like internal monologue from Nyla saying that, like, what he said under different circumstances would have made her absolutely furious. She knows she should feel insulted. She knows she should be angry about what he said, but she literally can't because she's, forced to be happy all the time, right? And so you extrapolate this and it's like, oh, a friend or loved one died. She can't even shed a tear. She can't bring herself to feel sad or depressed about their passing. Like, she literally has no choice but to laugh it off, right? She's always going to be happy in any circumstance, no matter what, right? In her own words, joy unbound and everlasting, right? So, like, it seems as though Nyla's got this thing trapped in a jar and is using its power for her own ends. But for one thing, she has no control over her own emotions as a result. And two, her name and identity have been stricken from history. So, who's really actually in control here? Um, but yeah, so I mentioned that she's using Ashlesh's power to her own ends. So, what are those ends? Right? Why is she, using this demon's power in the first place? What was the point of all this? She's going around and hunting monsters. That's kind of it, right? Like, it was sort of established that she wanted to be like a hero, right? Like the legendary figures that she read about that, battle great evils and face down great monstrosities. Um, So the sort of implication here, and again, it's hard to say anything for certain because we don't know what exactly went down in that initial encounter, but the sort of implication here is that Nyla made maybe some kind of bargain with Ashlesh to get its power to become this great heroine worthy of legend. But the price to pay for that is having her identity erased and being forced into this eternal state of joy at all times, right? So, the idea is like, okay, so she apparently like made this demon bargain just so that she can like become a great hero, and that's why she's running around fighting monsters. Um, And again, it's like that's a really cool premise. Absolutely. Again, the kind of issue that I have with it is that we don't actually know for certain if that's what her character is about, right? Again, you can kind of maybe infer that, she made some kind of bargain with Ashlesh so that she'd have the power to become a legend or something. But again, the fact is we don't know. We don't know what went down between them. We don't know, what deal or even if there was a deal that was made, right? So as it kind of stands, Nyla's character concept, and this is finally bringing it back around to that original topic I wanted to talk about, is her character concept is kind of twofold. One, she's wielding the power of this demon, but also she's kind of like just this monster hunter character. It's sort of like these two character concepts that were mashed together into one, which again, in and of itself, I don't necessarily even think is a problem, right? Especially because, as I've said many times on this channel, a lot of earlier league champions were just like one basic concept or one basic archetype, right? But it feels as if, and this doesn't even really apply to all that many newer champions, but it does feel like Riot has kind of tried to avoid repeating their earlier character concept history by doing this sort of melding of character concepts. So yeah, like Nyla is probably not even really the biggest offender of this, but I guess I wanted to sort of explain her situation first because this leans more into like the bigger overall. Again, I'm not really even sure I'd call it an issue, just a theme, I suppose, a pattern. But another character that I think encapsulates this topic a lot better, and one that I've talked about a fair bit before, is Akshan. Because again, it's like in my video about him, I mentioned that Akshan to me feels like two different character concepts that were kind of mashed together and they just didn't gel, right? Like the core identity of Akshan's character is that he's supposed to be like this Shuriman Robin Hood type figure, right? Like this local folk hero who, stands up for the little guy who fights against these warlords and these other tyrants throughout Shurima, right? Would probably have a beef with Zareth or Azir at some point. Just like picking fights with, the rich and the corrupt, and trying to defend, the poor and the impoverished and just you know, the people who are worse off because of, assholes, abusing their power and their wealth. And that is, like supposed to be the core of his idea, right? Like he's running around hunting scoundrels, as he calls them. But then also he's like this rogue sentinel who gave up the Order's mission for like this single-minded pursuit of reviving his master, right? And they give him this, the Absolver, this like stupid Deus Ex Machina plot device that I hate with a burning passion. It feels like they took the idea of, okay, we want like this, sort of rogue sentinel for the Sentinels event, and we have this character concept for like this, dashing rogue Shuriman Robin Hood type figure. So why don't we just, mash them together and make like a single character out of these two completely different and unrelated topics? And it didn't work at all, in my opinion. Right? Like, again, Lucian really could and should have been like the rogue sentinel in the story, in my opinion, right? If they had just not revived Senna when they did, maybe save that for after the event, right? And then you can have Akshan just be off on his own, doing his own completely different thing. He's, just this Shuriman rogue slash thief with a grappling hook who's, running around, doing Prince of Persia stuff, breaking into castles with like crazy parkour nonsense, swinging around rooftops like Spider Man, just being your friendly neighborhood Akshan, I guess. Um, he really would have worked a lot better, I think, if he was just, not tied to the Sentinels at all, but they crammed him into the Sentinel storyline because they wanted to mash these two character concepts together. And so, really, I think it's like the comparison and contrast here to make is like in Nyla's case, I think the idea works, right? Like you've got this monster hunter character, and you've got, this character who's, hosting an Ur-demon and ties into that plot line. And while Nyla, again, we lack a lot of information about definitively what her situation actually is, how much control she really has over Oshlesh. I think as a whole, her premise works a lot better. Whereas Akshan was, mashing two character concepts together and kind of just failing at it. So those two, I think, embody like the two extremes of this approach. And there is a third character, or technically two characters in one, that I think kind of fit in somewhere like between the two. And the character that I'm referring to, of course, is Aphelios, and by association, Elune. So Aphelios is weird to me because Aphelios feels kind of redundant in the lore, if I'm being completely honest. Like, the core concept behind Aphelios' character is, okay, we want like a weapon master character, right? And we kind of technically had that with Jax, but Jax doesn't. I mean, Jax's original character concept was that he was just so good with every weapon that he started fighting with a lamppost to basically nerf himself. Of course, that was in the old canon, the new canon. There's like a whole different story behind his situation and why he fights with a lamppost. But the idea behind Aphelios is like, okay, we want a champion whose actual thing is that they just switch between a bunch of different weapons, right? Like, kind of like Udyr's stance changes, but switching out from like just this whole arsenal, really. And so like that was seemingly the core concept behind the character's inception. And then, they decided, okay, well, what region are we going to fit them in? Like, what kind of powers are we going to give them? And they settled on Mount Targon and moon powers specifically. So they kind of, like, Aphelios' lore basically makes him out to be sort of like this Lunari assassin who was chosen by the will of the moon alongside his sister to push back against Solari oppression and overturn the cycle, between the moon cult and the sun cult, right? To help like Lunari push back and establish themselves as the dominant faction. And the issue here for me is that not what Diana is more or less supposed to do, right? Like she's supposed to be the moon's chosen one, right? Like she's the freaking aspect of the moon. But then we have Aphelios and Elune here who are also chosen ones of the moon, but they're not aspects, but they're still. I mean, like, Aphelios is even called the moon's voice, right? So, like, they're. They serve, at least it feels to me, like kind of the same function as Diana in terms of the narrative, right? The only difference is that like Diana is technically supposed to be the leader of the Lunari, even though we don't really get to see her leading the Lunari all that often. And then Aphelios and Elune are just like, we're gonna be like Lunari special assassins that just kind of go around and murder Solari elders until like the balance shifts, I guess. And it's like it really does kind of just feel like they took like, okay, we want to do something with the whole Solari Lunari conflict because that storyline hasn't progressed much, like at all. Um, and we want to have like this, weapon master character who can just switch between a bunch of different weapons. So we introduce Aphelios, and by extension Elune, who to very quickly and briefly summarize their lore, the situation is that, Elune is living in this temple in the spirit realm that has like a bunch of these Lunari weapons that were created by celestial spirits, I guess. I don't know. Um, Through their connection, Elune can basically send these weapons over to Affiliate, right? So it's like basically, okay, here's like a celestial sniper rifle that you can use to assassinate. Here's like a celestial shuriken, I guess. Right, and so Aphelios can just cycle between all these different cosmic weapons at will because, Elune is like pushing them to him through reality. It's a situation of like I don't hate Aphelios or Elune. I don't really even necessarily have like strong enough opinions about them that I feel like I'd, be able to do a let's talk about episode. To me, they're always just kind of like Aphelios and Elune have always just kind of been there, I guess. I don't feel like they have enough of a story significance or even enough of their own identity for me to really care all that much. Because again, they just kind of feel like Diana 2.0, right? Like, oh, we're chosen ones of the moon who are supposed to be pushing back against the Solari and helping the Lunari rise back to prominence. Again, what Diana is supposed to be doing. Um, but yeah, and so it really just feels like they wanted to take like the Weapon Master character and, they had like another idea for a character that was like, oh, we want to have like a brother and a sister who were like spiritually connected to one another. So let's just kind of merge those two ideas together. And again, I do kind of have to stress like a lot of this is speculation on my part, right? Like, obviously, I read, like some dev interviews, right, talking about like, some thought processes that go on behind the scenes about how certain characters come about. Obviously, like, champions in League of Legends go through like several different iterations in more recent years, right, has been more open with like showing concept art, right, and like various ideas for what a champion could have become before they eventually wind up becoming the champions that we know, right? But ultimately, the only ones who can really say with like any 100% degree of certainty what the thought processes were, of course, the people who actually worked on these champions. Um, but I guess it's just like it feels to me like these three characters, Nyla, Akshan, and Aphelios, are kind of just Riot experimenting with the style of we have like these, because every champion concept, starts with like just a basic premise, right? Like, okay, for Jinx, we want to have like this sort of wild, crazy, unhinged character, and then the concept just kind of evolves from there, right? Like every, champion starts out with like, we have this idea for a character, and then we're going to expand on that, which is certainly um, more of a unique approach than, again, just like, take a Minotaur or a Golem and throw them into a game, right? But yeah, it's a style that has worked to varying degrees of effect, in my opinion, right? And again, I can't say with any degree of certainty whether or not my reading of this situation is truly accurate, but I do feel like it's something to, take note of. Um, so I guess the question then just kind of becomes, like, when is it a good idea to merge these character concepts and when should they, right? Like, do you think it would have been better, for example, if, like, we got, you know, Aphelios and Elune, but, like, they had a totally different thing going on, right? Like, just this brother and sister, right? Like, this brother who's running around with, like, his sister's ghost, but maybe they have, like, a totally different dynamic. And then we could have, like, another character from, like, maybe I don't know, Piltover or Zahn, who has like a whole bunch of different weapons that they cycle between, right? Or maybe like from Noxus or something. Again, I'm not necessarily even saying that I would have preferred that exactly. Again, I don't even, have all that strong a feeling about Aphelios as a champion, but I feel like that in and of itself kind of just speaks to how unimpactful he kind of feels in the long run, right? Again, like would Akshan maybe have worked better if he was allowed to just be his own dashing rogue character in Shurima and just wasn't tied to or related to the Sentinels at all, right? Would Nyla, again, even though I like her character, I can't help but think like, you know, um, would she have maybe worked better as, I don't know, something else entirely? um, yeah, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure if, my point or my idea is coming across here, right? Again, this is why I normally like to script my videos. Um, but again, this was something that I wasn't entirely sure how I wanted to script it or if I even really wanted to do a normal video on it. So, that's why I decided to make this sort of unstructured ramble video, as it were, to sort of raise the topic. But, you know, um, I guess that's about as much as I can really say on the matter. So, what do you all think? Do you, sort of agree or disagree with these ideas? Do you even understand what I'm trying to say? And would you be interested in more unscripted videos like this in the future? So, as usual, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I'll see you all next time.